Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We are officially in game week now. We've been talking about this matchup now for a couple of weeks, but SMU, Penn State, this Saturday in Beaver Stadium, noon kickoff, first round playoff matchup with a trip to Arizona and the Fiesta Bowl national quarterfinal on the line. It's a matchup we're going to discuss a lot here on the podcast. Next couple episodes, you'll also have a chance to read all about it over at lions247.com as this game week progresses. We started off with a bang here on a Monday. Got James Franklin, quarterback Drew Allar, a few different team captains up at the podium, offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, all that coverage over at lions247.com. We're actually going to double dip with the press conference setting to start this week because of the college football playoff setup. We'll hear from Tom Allen, the defensive coordinator. We'll hear from a few defensive players on Tuesday in Beaver Stadium. So just really setting the stage. We'll talk about that SMU matchup, Penn State's early preparation for it a little bit later here in this episode. If you missed our last episode of the podcast, which dropped Friday, spent a lot of time breaking down the impact of KJ Winston's NFL draft declaration. And on this episode, we've got a little bit more future perspective as it comes to the quarterback room, moving from safety to cornerback, because a couple big reveals for 2025 and actually for the remainder of this season coming our way to begin the week. And to help break that down, Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan join us from lions247.com. Guys, good to get you back on board. And Daniel, we'll begin with the obvious. Quarterbacks have the spotlight here to begin game week. A couple different reasons why. On Sunday, it surfaced that Beau Pribula was going to enter the transfer portal. He ultimately announced that himself, and he will be not part of the playoff run that Penn State is preparing for. James Franklin said on Sunday that Beau Pribula was out there on the practice field. He also mentioned it was clear that there was probably some trouble being completely focused in on the task at hand. And ultimately, what we heard from James Franklin on Monday wasn't as much about Beau Pribula as it was about the NCAA and where things stand in the college football universe. Before we get to Drew Allar and the news he provided, let's talk about Beau Pribula and his sudden departure from 2024 playoff plans.
I think in his statement that he released Sunday night, announcing his decision or confirming it, Beau Pribula called it, I think, an impossible decision. And when you think about the totality of what he's trying to do, which is look out for himself and his own future, someone who has college football starting quarterback aspirations, while also trying to, help Penn State win a national championship, go through the college football playoff. Given the way that the college football calendar is right now, those two things didn't really mesh together in a way that would work for Beau Pribula and for James Franklin. Like you said, when James Franklin talked about it today, I mean, he had nothing but praise for Beau Pribula. He said he would do the recruitment over again if he had to. That what Pribula brought from that on-field perspective, and also as a teammate. We heard a lot about what he was like behind the scenes. He was definitely someone who, was really respected by everyone in that building. But James Franklin said that the way that things work out is that if you're a quarterback, there's only so many of these jobs, and you really do have to find the right fit for you. Beau Pribula is in his third year, so he's 2 years left. So when you make that choice, it needs to be the right one for you. Franklin brought up that these places want him to come visit, that you want to get that in-person look at your potential school. And all of that together was just not really tenable with the way that James Franklin framed it was as preparing like the starter, which is, we know how, Pribula prepares every week. And so it got to the point, it sounds like, based on what James Franklin said, where they're on the practice field yesterday, then they have a meeting Sunday night, and the conclusion that they come to, I mean, it's one of those things where it's tough, especially when Beau Pribula's backstory as a Pennsylvania kid. We've all seen the pictures of him in like a Trace McSorley jersey, like in Penn State gear growing up. And talking to him, you could tell that this really did mean a lot to him. So I think it was something that we were really interested in seeing how that would play out. I mean, quarterbacks, they don't really stick around 3 or 4 years for the opportunity to play 1 year anymore. That's just the nature of the business. And, that's what I think Penn State got caught up in a little bit, combined with the way the calendar falls this year.
We've been wondering about this for a while, Mark. We've talked about it after a few different practices, walking off the field, what it might look like if Pribula was in a situation where it was clear that Drew Allar was going to return for 2025. We now know that to be the case, and we'll get into that aspect in a little bit. Drew Allar planning to be back as a senior next season. But also because of the timing of this, Pribula was going to have to be in a situation where if he wanted to truly have that transfer portal experience where he is truly in communication on different campuses, getting a feel for his potential fit, having those conversations about, potential NIL opportunities at other programs, that was probably going to either have to happen during the playoffs or that was going to have to happen with Beau Pribula removing himself from Penn State situation. And there's a spot where there's some ramifications here, Mark, where you can stay with the team you're with through their last game in the playoff. Then you have a 5-day grace period, essentially a window, but you're at a spot where you're into the second round. All of a sudden you're in January. There's schools beginning classes. So how is Beau Pribula supposed to get on a campus? And ultimately you win your semifinal game, or you move to the semifinals. You're into mid-January. You're into almost late January. And so the question became, how can Beau Pribula remain number 2 quarterback, remain a presence with that dual threat ability, while also doing right by himself to set himself up for 2025. And as James Franklin said, through some man-to-man conversations, he really said, Beau Pribula was a man's man in this situation about the transparency, the conversations they had. He said he didn't feel like it was a fault of his. He didn't feel like it was a fault of Beau Pribula, but they couldn't find the scenario that made sense that resulted in Beau Pribula still being in State College and also being able to chart his upcoming portal opportunity.
Well, both of you guys are men's men to me. I just want to let you know. But for all the griping about the college football playoff format, or should they reseed, should they do, that's a bunch of baloney. I don't care about that. This situation is untenable. This is a good kid in a good program forced to do something that, if a lot of people are saying, hey, and my initial thought was, why wouldn't you just stay through the playoff and have an opportunity? I mean, you could end up being the starting quarterback if the starter gets bumped up, but you take a step back and you realize there are a limited number of opportunities out there, and you're going to restrict yourself from getting possibly the best opportunity, the NIL ramifications. I mean, the NCAA or whoever is controlling things now, and maybe Franklin's right, maybe we need a commissioner of college football, has to get this portal thing schedule figured out. You can't have it overlapping with the playoffs. It just isn't working. I heard James Franklin today, and that struck me as a guy who was kind of truly pained by this. And remember, they're cycling through dozens and dozens of players every year. So you have to develop like a thick skin about this sort of stuff. But this is a unique situation where this guy wanted to stay with you he wanted to do the right thing, and the situation just didn't lend itself to it. And whoever's running things, whether it's the coaches, whether they appoint some commissioner, whether it's the NCAA, this is the one thing that I think they really have to take a hard look at, because you're putting kids in a very difficult position. The whole idea with the transfer portal was to help kids, to give them more opportunities. And this isn't doing that. So I know I'm up on the soapbox a little bit, but I will guarantee you, if it's not next year, in the next few years, you're going to see Beau Pribula back around Penn State, whether it's an off week, whether it's the summer, whether he comes in for the blue-white game, because he's friends with these guys. And I think a lot of Penn State fans ought to be rooting for him wherever he lands. I mean, he's just put in a difficult position. And again, for all the talk about the college football playoff, that's going to work itself out. This is having a real impact on kids in their lives, and I think it's just ridiculous.
We knew that Beau was betting on himself back in January of 2022 by sticking with this commitment, which predated Drew Allar jumping in the class. It predated Kirk Ciarrocca or predated Mike Yurcich replacing Kirk Ciarrocca. He stuck with it. He knew what he was getting into with the really strong counterpart. They got the campus together a couple of Januaries ago. Pribula's been the number 2 the last couple of seasons. Obviously, he understood what Drew Allar coming back in 2025 would mean. But Daniel, I think a lot of people on our message board, us ourselves, have talked about the affinity that he's had to this program since childhood. And so you can imagine some of the emotions that were involved in this decision, not just for Beau, but those like James Franklin who've been a part of that process and going back to high school. And just hearing from some of the players today, we hear from Drew Allar, we hear from team captain Nick Dawkins, essentially saying that one of the more accountable figures on this roster is Beau Pribula. And to see him hit the exit door here a few days before you take on SMU and try to launch this postseason run and get to a national championship game potentially at the end of it, I do wonder a little bit how Penn State just carries forward like it's normal week, because they're all about that 1-0 mentality. And I know the last thing James Franklin once dropped on top of a playoff game week is this, but it's here. And my whole sense of it is, whether you talk to people who are on the staff in the Lasch building, whether you talk to people who are on the roster in the Lasch building, this is one of the guys that people love. This is one of the guys that they like seeing at the office every day. And whether it's his fault, the NCAA's fault, or someone else's, he's not part of the plan right now. And so this is kind of an unexpected, turbulent moment for Penn State.
I know that people have strong feelings about using the word distraction, and what is a distraction, what isn't a distraction, and this is one of those things that it feels like it could actually be one, because you are tangibly changing the team, like you are removing something that has been a key cog in it. I think Andy Kotelnicki today said that this is a spoke, like the Pribula package was a spoke in the wheel, and now they're gonna have to use replace it, put a different spoke in. But I think that the fact that Pribula is someone who, there was that affinity for, I think that helps the situation a little bit too, because it's not like you have someone who is leaving under, really dubious circumstances or in a way that is, tearing at the team, where you have factions and things like that. I know that right after the news came out, obviously when you're on social media, you see the extremes that some people have in their responses. And so you see some of those, but then you look at Beau Pribula's teammates who were reposting his statement. I went on the Instagram to see the players who were sharing it, and it was pretty universal, where the sentiment was basically like, go get yours. Like, this is your time. This is your opportunity. And I think that that's something that we can lose sight of a little bit on the outside, where it's like, these players know it's a business. Like they're in there every single day. They're hearing everything. They're seeing everything. They know that you have to look out for yourself at various points. That's just how this is. That's how life is. And so I think that to see that response, I think that we're dealing with a mature team right now, and that I think that there obviously is some sadness, and there probably is like a little bit of hurt with having this, but I think that at the same time, these players know, like they see Beau Pribula practice every day. Like they know who he is. Like you said, like they know how he goes about his business, and they know that he deserves a starting opportunity somewhere. So I think that, to me, that's kind of the overarching emotion that I got out of this. I do think that you really do have real questions about the mechanics of things now. When you talk about, I think the inference that James Franklin made was, yeah, we'll keep some of the, I guess, quarterback run stuff in the playbook, but maybe we'll use guys that we haven't used yet, or guys who haven't been played that much. It's a bit of a short notice to do some of that. You look at the situation now where Ethan Grunkemeyer is probably the number 2 quarterback, and he hasn't taken a live game snap this year. I think that stuff is all very real, and that's all stuff that you really have to adjust to. But I think that that's the tangible stuff. I think the emotional stuff can sort its way out a little bit. And I think you heard what Drew Allar said. I thought the last question from Audrey Snyder to Drew was good, and got a good reaction from him about just the human side of this. And I think that was pretty telling about how Drew feels about Beau and feels about this whole situation. And to have that come from a captain, I think Jalen Reed had a pretty strong message last night on Instagram. Hear from Nick Dawkins, Tyler Warren, like those are the tone setters of this team. And so, I think from that perspective, where it's a circumstance like this, this isn't certain guys who have been on the team in the past that have, disappeared off the face of the earth suddenly and popped up in the portal. Like this is someone who I think everyone knows what the deal is. Everyone knows what the situation is.
The bizarre thing is, it feels like such an off-season conversation, something we'll be talking about in late January, early February, but here we are. Playoffs are just around the corner. And I think James Franklin has mentioned this in the past. I've heard other coaches allude to this and kind of compare. But if you're an NFL team and you're bridging that gap from regular season to playoffs, and the rules of free agency are, hey, if you declare now, you can get ahead of the line. You can start bargaining now. But if you want to wait and stay with your team, then you can declare after the playoffs. It's like, what are we doing? What kind of situation are you even creating where this is a possibility? It is real right now. By the way, SMU's starting quarterback to open the season, their current number 2 quarterback, Preston Stone, he's double dipping. He's currently in the transfer portal. He's also serving as SMU's number 2 quarterback. He could be involved in this matchup on Saturday. So there's a lot of different approaches we're seeing across the country. And I think you make a great point, Daniel. We can point to the emotional impact but there is a tangible thing here. Now, Beau Pribula, if he's not around for that second half in Madison, when Penn State goes in the field for the third quarter, trailing Wisconsin in late October, are they in this situation? If Beau Pribula doesn't put together a really strong second half, do they avoid an upset that night? But overall, Mark, it's been Pribula really being a change of pace presence, a supplemental piece. He's been under 10 game snaps in most of the Big Ten matchups. Wisconsin, blowout win over Purdue, and a blowout win at Maryland are the only exceptions to him being under those 10 snaps per game. But what do you make of the immediate initial on-field ramifications that Penn State may deal with? Because although it wasn't a big total, we could see Beau Pribula in the first series of the game. We could see him in a goal line package, and everyone knew they had to respect him. This is a guy who has 19 total touchdowns, 1 interception in his career at the college level.
Well, first of all, I'm trying to wrap my head around a sensitive person like Audrey Snyder getting to the human end of things with Drew Allar. I'm kidding, Audrey. She knows I'm only joking around. A couple things, Tyler. One, you never want to see somebody get hurt, but don't you feel real good now that Beau had that half against Wisconsin? I mean, you didn't want it to come the way that it came, but the opportunity that he had to put things on tape as an actual full functioning quarterback, not just a wildcat guy going in there. And not only did he perform, but he performed really well and led you to an important win. I mean, that's really big for him. And I'm so glad he got that opportunity. The one thing that James said today is that Grunk had, I think he said around 350 snaps in practice. Does that help you in a game? I don't know. I know I was scratching my head a little bit in some of these blowouts where you didn't get him at least a series, but that's not the way James Franklin operates. It's not the way they've ever really operated. So, I think the idea was to try to redshirt him, and you still could have done that, but you're going to be in a difficult situation. You have Tyler Warren, who I think could probably do some of the same things, but then you eliminate what Tyler Warren can do in other areas when you had Beau out there. And we saw instances where Singleton definitely did it. I'm forgetting if Katron did it. Took wildcat snaps. And Amari Evans was a high school quarterback. Can you do some things with him, out of those packages? So there are options there. But he was practicing yesterday. I mean, as we record this on Monday, he was practicing. So to Daniel's point, you just don't flip that switch and say, oh, yeah, okay, so this is who we're going to go. Did they have maybe a sense that this was going to happen? I guess. But if that were the case, wouldn't you have been trying to get Grunk a snap here or there? So, yeah, I know I'm not answering your question directly because I don't know, Tyler. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the real world ramifications here are that they better hope that Allar stays healthy. I think you could get by with the stuff that Beau did in those different packages meant just for him with some other guys. But I think you're going to be in a heap of trouble. And that's not a knock on Grunk. It's just a very difficult thing to come in and play at this level, in a playoff game when you haven't seen the field. Your 350 practice snaps are great. I love that. But how many times have we seen, whether it's kickers or whatever, these guys are playing really well in practice and then they go in and it doesn't quite work. I'm not projecting failure. I'm just saying it's a wild card. You just don't know. Taquan Roberson. And I don't want to put that on Grunk, but he obviously was looking good in practice and I'm sure had 350 practice snaps. But when he got there, it just wasn't clicking. So I think Grunk's going to be fine when he gets the opportunity, but we just don't know. We just haven't seen enough of him.
You're going from a point now as a Penn State fan, maybe as a Penn State coach, staff member, to saying, oh, Drew's not available this play. That's okay, but we'll figure it out. It might look a little different, but we're going to figure it out. Now you're saying, okay, let's see what Ethan Grunkemeyer looks like against a different college opponent that isn't just
A
11
playoff
of his
team.
teammates. Exactly, in a playoff team. And oh, by the way, the reason that we've seen Grunkemeyer get so much work on the practice field this season and into the spring even was because you didn't have Jackson Smolik available. Remember, he took a red shirt last year. He only took 2 snaps in games last year for those 13 games. So he also took a red shirt in a very big way, didn't get a lot of game work. He was injured in the spring. James Franklin revealed to us today that he's actually been cleared as of the last week or so. But I think we're all anticipating number 2 will be Ethan Grunkemeyer based on what they've been able to accomplish on the field. Drew Allar indicated that Grunkemeyer will be getting the number 2 reps this week. And so all of a sudden, a guy that's been in relative obscurity when we talk about a team's playoff run here through the first 13 games of the year, he may just be one moment away from being the quarterback for Penn State in a playoff matchup. That's the real effect of this happening in the middle of a playoff run here for Penn State. And let's go over to QB1 now, and I'm sure that Beau Pribula will be a topic that we circle back to in the coming weeks and months, and we'll see. Maybe he'll land in the Big Ten when this is all said and done, but he's off to explore his options. Drew Allar knows what he wants in 2025, and that is to stay with Penn State. He put it out there on Sunday after some reporting from national reporters that you had Drew Allar telling the staff he was going to be back. He put it out there himself before a press conference. We had a chance to follow up with that on a press conference setting on Monday. And Daniel, obviously, this is a significant step for any team when you get your quarterback plan in place this far out from the next year's kickoff. But with Drew Allar, a guy that's really been discussed as, could he be a fringe round 1 guy? Where is he on the board right now? You don't see him in a lot of mock drafts. And people in the industry are saying, coming back, get some more seasoning. He could be in that conversation for QB1 in the 2026 draft. So what do you make of this decision personally for Drew Allar and his long-term football future? And then more near-term, the Nittany Lions and what they've got planned for the next 12 to 14 months of their football future?
Yeah, I think when you look at it for Drew Allar, I think it lays out well for him to elevate his stock, to keep improving. You look at the jump that he made from year 1 to year 2 as a starter, and where he improved, how he's playing differently, his confidence. Like, he really does look like I don't want to say he's like completely different quarterback, because he's still got that arm. He can still make those wow throws, but over the course of this year, like, you've seen those areas for growth really, really starkly. And obviously, I don't necessarily think the jump in some of those areas he's not going to go from 60% completion to 70% to 80%, but I can see him building on this year. I think that someone on our board made the good point where in the NFL, they don't necessarily let you learn on the job. And I think that Allar is at a point where he still has some growth to go. He still has some development to go. And so you wonder, like, a lot of those teams, if you want to be a high pick, there's a reason that those teams are picking high, and you don't necessarily have that much control over the situation that you could walk into. So, I think Allar is giving himself the opportunity to keep improving, keep developing physically. I know that was a big storyline with him during the offseason, and I think he's in a really good position to boost his draft stock going into next year. It is interesting. I mean, I think that this year is regarded as a pretty weak class. And I think that if Drew Allar were to put together, 1 or 2 good playoff games, and then you go out to Indianapolis, like, we know he's going to interview well, and then we know what he can do physically, I'm sure that his arrow could really be pointed up. But I think that taking that gamble on yourself to come back, do it at Penn State, raise your stock that way. I understand it. Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, who is also regarded as one of the better potential quarterbacks in this class, he's coming back. So it'll be interesting to see how those dominoes fall and what that whole landscape looks like. As for Penn State, I mean, getting Andy Kotelnicki back and Drew Allar back, with getting those that sorted out within the same week pretty much. I mean, I think that makes you feel really, really good about where Penn State is headed offensively, considering what we saw this year. We know that the team next year is going to look different. The supporting cast is going to be different, whether that's guys going to the draft, guys graduating, transfer portal, etc. But I think that if you have those 2 as your building blocks, you feel pretty good. I'm sure some people on the outside, maybe some wide receivers in the transfer portal, looking for a home, maybe seeing Drew Allar coming back and knowing that at this point in the portal cycle, maybe that can, be a good selling point for Penn State. But, I think that this really does have the potential to be a win-win for Penn State. Of course, we know that these things can change quickly. The unexpected can happen. All those caveats and disclaimers that go into it. But, I think that for Penn State and for Drew Allar, where we are right now, December 16th, you feel pretty good about this moving forward.
We got answers from a couple marquee members of that 2022 class, which we know came to the campus, made a huge difference during a Rose Bowl run. Now they're making a huge impact during a playoff push. But Drew Allar is staying. KJ Winston, safety, he is going. We talked about that in the last episode of this podcast. But guys like Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, it's a pretty substantial list that we're still going to be waiting for 2025 decisions from. But Mark, Drew Allar's going to have a chance to come back as a third-year starter, as a fourth-year player in the program. He's already number 6 all-time in total yards. He's number 3 all-time in touchdown passes. He'll get to make his mark in a big way on the record books. But he's got a playoff run ahead of him. I understand the timing here, especially with Beau Pribula. Obviously, there was transparency in the quarterback room about what Drew was going to do, and that helped educate Beau on what his next move might need to be. But to go public like this, and Daniel mentioned it, we got playoffs. You could have 4 games where Drew Allar could catch fire, maybe get a lot of people talking, get some buzz going. I know some of his moments in the game against Oregon got some buzz out there in social media. Any reaction to the specific timing of this announcement? Because I know you actually asked Drew about this yourself.
Yeah, I mean, he basically wanted to get it out of the way so it's not a distraction moving forward, and I give him all the credit. And Daniel touched on this a little bit. I mean, think about the timing with respect to the portal. I mean, now all of a sudden, the coordinator's coming back and Allar's coming back, and you have maybe 1.5 established receivers in the room. And, I don't think you could be critical of Andy Kotelnicki, just given their production. I mean, second in the Big Ten in yards per game, despite not getting the production. So I think how attractive could that be? The other thing about Allar, and I was just looking this up, I wanted to double check, but if what I'm seeing online is right, he's still only 20. Yeah. I don't think he turns 21 until March. I mean, so he's still a pretty young guy. And, I never got the sense that he was that guy. Like, I think with KJ Winston, I don't think any of us were surprised. If he would have stayed healthy, we definitely would not have been surprised. But with Allar, you kind of get the feel, and that there's nothing wrong with that. Some kids come in and they know they want to be gone in 3 years, and they're gone in 3 years, and they're good enough to do it. But with Allar, I never really got that sense. I think he kind of enjoys the whole college thing, which I don't think everybody does. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think the ability to work under Kotelnicki for another year would have been interesting had Kotelnicki taken that West Virginia job or gotten a West Virginia job, or however you wanted to say it. Does that change Drew's? And if I would have, I'm kicking myself a little bit for not asking that question. We'll get more access to Drew at some point along the way, but I think that's an important thing to ask him, is how much did Andy's decision impact your decision? Because think about it. If you're sitting there waiting to figure out who your OC is, I mean, that's a pretty big thing to be worried about. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the fact that he made a decision now, I take him at his word that he just wanted to get this out of his, he didn't even want to talk about it today. To his credit, he knew he had to. And I think he wanted to focus on SMU and moving forward, so they'd be so fortunate.
Yeah, along those lines, what you're talking about, Mark, of Allar enjoying this experience of, being the quarterback and everything. I mean, in the statement he put out on social media today, like the first line is literally, this is the most fun that I've had playing football. And when you consider what it was like last year in his first year as a starter, and kind of everything that went around with that and just how that felt being around, I think that he is in a place where he is enjoying it. I'm sure that the NIL compensation is pretty good as well. That's just how these things go. But I think that's kind of revealing too, as to where his head is at, where his priorities are. And I think that, really coming into his own this year and the comfort that he has, I think that that'll be a big thing for him spinning it forward.
I think a lot of what we're going to look back at 2023 with Drew Allar is a 19-year-old afraid to make mistakes, a 19-year-old walking on eggshells. And the 20-year-old version of Drew Allar working with Andy Kotelnicki has been different. And he told us today in this press conference regarding his relationship with Kotelnicki, quote, "He has helped me a ton to be an authentic me. He's just allowed me to be me." And that's an important thing. And you're right, Mark. If they're sitting in a situation here where they've got an interim OC from within the staff, it could be somebody that Drew Allar loves, but then you're thinking about a 3 OC and 3-year situation. How does that impact your development? Might you be better just jumping into the frying pan in the NFL and getting it underway versus, hey, there's a stabilizing presence? I know the head coach, of course, with James Franklin, but here's my offensive coordinator. We know he loves his quarterbacks coach in Danny O'Brien. So in this day and age, when you see star quarterbacks, the 5 stars, the guys near the top of the rankings, rarely do they get through 2-3 years on the same campus. I mean, just check our rankings last several years. These guys are moving on after their freshman year. They're moving on after 2 years. They're moving on a couple times in their career sometimes. So this is what you asked for if you're James Franklin, a chance to have this kid in your building for 4 years. We'll see how year 3 ends. You got a chance to go make a lot more noise here, but you've got it. And I think this is a really big opportunity, as much as it pains you in some different ways to lose Beau Pribula. The trade-off here is you've got the same quarterback in place, and you really think that Drew Allar has that huge, rare ceiling that we really see. And I know Andy Kotelnicki, in discussing him, said, quote, "He has an elite ability to handle things like a professional at the age of 20. It's really uncommon. It really is," end quote, from Andy Kotelnicki. And guys, we're going to have a lot of time to break down the SMU matchup this week. We're going to have a Mustangs reporter join us from Dallas to give us the inside information on what SMU is coming to town with and their strengths and weaknesses. And we'll get on the practice field again Wednesday. But Mark, I'm just going to throw it back to you. We're 5 days away from getting back to Beaver Stadium. We think it's going to be in the 20s for kickoff. It's going to be a playoff matchup, whiteout kind of setting at noon in Beaver Stadium. What are the most important elements for you from this Penn State game week? As it feels familiar, but it also feels different than anything we've dealt with before.
It seems surreal, doesn't it? It's like that little break, and it wasn't as long as you typically get for a bowl. But yeah, I think the keys for Penn State are to learn from the Oregon game, especially the defense. I don't think the defense was that bad. I mean, it played very poorly, but I think it's much better than it showed in the Oregon game. And I think this is a real opportunity to come back and reestablish itself as the unit that we all kind of think it is. And then offensively, we started to see some great things from the ground game late in the season. And, a lot of that ties to a healthy Nick Singleton. How important might that be in the cold weather if there's precipitation? Who knows what's going to happen at this point. But I think just staying on schedule the best you can. I mean, I'd imagine getting all this stuff out of the way today was huge for Franklin. We've talked a lot about how he's a creature of habit and how that serves him well at times and how sometimes it doesn't serve him well. But to be able to put all this stuff, and I don't mean that even in a negative way, it's the new college football. Decisions are made and kids are moving on and kids are announcing that they're staying. I think getting all of that in the rearview mirror as quickly as possible and just focusing on the task at hand. And I know it's cliche, James Franklin with his SMU, but I think it's really imperative this week that they do that, because it would be very easy to be distracted. And I think the coaching staff has to get dialed in too. I mean, you're worried about the portal, guys visiting and whatnot. I mean, that's all fine and dandy, but, let your recruiting staff do what they need to do. You have that big recruiting staff now. The coaches at this point, handle the visits and stuff over the weekend, but get dialed in now for what this game is all about and what this opponent's all about.
Think about all the stuff they've done, and what has it been like? 12 days or 2 weeks or 16 days, I guess, since we saw
12 days of Christmas has a new meaning, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, we saw them beat up on Maryland, clinch their spot. Everyone's excited about for the Big Ten championship game. And then you think about since then, well, they signed 27 incoming freshmen, one of them which they had to flip over from Michigan in a big battle. They went out and they played Oregon to the final buzzer in Indianapolis, a really exciting matchup when they fell behind early. Then they've got the transfer portal. They're trying to recruit their own players from entering the portal and stick around at least for a playoff run perhaps. And then you're also monitoring the situation out and about, bringing players in for visits. Last week, we got a lot of content on the portal at Lions247.com. It's a subject we'll pick up again. I wanted to finish here, though, because I'm worried if we don't address it to close out this episode, we just never will. And we've talked about it so much in Tyler Warren's incredible season. Award season has come. It is just about over already. But the Mackey Award does ultimately go to Tyler Warren, nation's top tight end. He is the first Nittany Lion to receive that honor, and I know that he spoke today in his press conference saying he felt like it was representative of decades of high standard tight end play on behalf of Penn State. He's the one who picks it up. And then 7th overall in the Heisman Trophy is where he finished in those that voting process. That's the highest of any Nittany Lion since Saquon Barkley back in 2017 was a top 5 votes recipient. You were all over the award ceremony coverage for us, Daniel Gallen. What do you make of Tyler Warren as we put the kind of the punctuation mark at the end of award season? And he was a guy that we haven't been talking about it since August, like some of those other finalists. It's been more of a starting in November. It was all underway, and he got to this point.
Yeah, I think that for Tyler Warren to finish in 7th place in the Heisman voting, he got one first place vote. I think that that's a pretty cool feather in his cap, and I think that that's a deserved recognition. I think the Heisman voting is one of those things where, obviously we're all focused on the winner, who was Colorado's Travis Hunter, very well deserved, and that top 4 was a good group of guys. You had Cam Ward, Ashton Genty, who finished 2nd, Dylan Gabriel. Those are some very quality players, but I think it's one of those things where, even if you don't win, you can still put being in the mix on your resume. That's still something that, is a big credit to Tyler Warren, and, should be in his Penn State bio moving forward, that he finished, in the top 10 of the Heisman voting as a tight end. I think that that's a pretty cool feat. He did get the Mackey Award, so he got the top individual award for a tight end. He is going to miss out on consensus All-American status. 3 of the 5 teams have been released, and he was the second teamer on all of them. Bowling Green's Harold Fannin Jr., who we all saw in Beaver Stadium, and who had a historic year. He's gotten the first team nods on the first 3 All-American teams that have come out. Abdul Carter, meanwhile, he's got consensus status. He's been a first teamer across the board. I think that he missed out on all the individual awards, which I was a little bit surprised about. But I think to see the different All-American panels, put him in that air, I think is very cool because, when you think about all the oxygen that was dedicated to Tyler Warren and, a lot of the focus that was put on Drew Allar and the offense, it's kind of a quiet 19 and a half tackles for loss and 10 sacks for Abdul Carter this year. So I think that he really deserved those honors, and he got them. So I think we got 2 more All-American teams. There's one more defensive lineman award that Abdul Carter is in the mix for, and then we can close the book on things. But I did have one last Beau Pribula thing that I thought of last night, and Tyler, you jogged my memory of it. But you talk about him being a big Penn State fan growing up and everything, and he talked a lot about what the opportunity to play quarterback at Penn State meant to him. And even though it was, Mike Locksley might not have agreed with it, but it is cool that Beau Pribula's final play as a Penn State quarterback is a touchdown pass, in Beaver Stadium. I think that was something that popped into my head last night where, it wasn't just like a kneel down or something like that. He got to put an exclamation point on a game where they, where they clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game on his last snap in Beaver Stadium as the Penn State quarterback. So that was something that I thought, was cool and should be pointed out too.
And I'll note that he had an 18-yard run to set up a 1-yard touchdown. He didn't get to the end zone himself, but he had an 18-yard run to kind of get them to the doorstep against Oregon during that comeback attempt. And yeah, he's been a piece. It's very strange to say we're just going to remove him from the equation here now that we're going from game 13 to game 14, but such is life in college football here in 2024. Penn State will roll on. We will roll on. But we'll come back to you with another episode of this podcast midweek. We'll break down SMU, give you their take from Dallas before they head up here to Happy Valley. And we'll also break down the latest Nittany Lions happenings in the transfer portal, guys coming to campus, Penn State exploring a lot of different options at a variety of positions. We'll get into that later this week, along with our takeaways from the Penn State practice field from another press conference setting on Tuesday in Beaver Stadium. Along the way, catch our updates at lions247.com. Mark, Daniel, always appreciate it. Big week ahead, and we'll talk to these folks soon.
Thanks, Tyler.
See ya.
On behalf of those guys, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.